So welcome learners. So as part of the introduction to smart regions, smart cities and smart regions, we'll be discussing the concept of villages and planning for villages as part of this course. We'll start with defining rural, and it's very clear that rural is something which is not urban. As per the census definition of urban, it says that all the administrative units that have been defined by statute as urban, like municipal corporation, municipality, cantonment board, notified town area committee, town panchayats, etc., are known as statutory towns. So, when we are defining rural, we are taking everything that is not urban. So, if it is urban, then these are the following two criteria which make a settlement urban. First is that it should be statutorily defined by a statute as urban, which includes municipal corporations, municipalities, cantonment boards, etc. Further, statutory towns should, with population of 1 lakh and above, they are characterized as cities. All the other places which satisfy the following criteria, such as a minimum population of 5,000 persons, 75% and above of the male main working population being engaged in non-agricultural pursuits. So, there are 2-3 things in this second criteria which says that there should be male main working population that should be engaged in non-agricultural pursuits, and a density of population of at least 400 persons per square kilometers. So these 3 criteria, if it is being met, then a settlement can also be called a census town, which may be administratively rural because it has not been notified or declared as a statutory town by a state notification, but it meets these 3 criteria, and so it is in a stage of transformation, and it is progressing towards becoming an urban settlement. But if it meets these 3 criteria, of course it is a census town. So if drawing from rural, if we look at what is rural development, it is the subset of a broader term development, which again is a subjective concept, and generally speaking, development is something which is desirable. So a change that is desirable. So when we are talking of rural development, we are looking at how rural areas can be made more developed, and something which is better than the current situation. So if we are looking at smart regions, we are looking at smart villages, then it should of course be developed in a more better way that is desirable. When we are also looking at rural development, there is a lot of focus nowadays on sustainable development. So we are also looking at how to make the villages or rural areas more sustainable, so that we can think of it as a developed settlement in the long run. Sustainable, of course, everybody knows that it has 3 aspects to it. One is economic sustainability, second is social sustainability or equity, and third is your environmental sustainability. So when we are talking of sustainable development, it is quite similar to what we are thinking of is as part of smart villages. So sustainable development in that sense means that you are making settlements or villages more smarter. So rural development thus connotes overall development of rural areas with a view to improve the quality of life of rural people. So it is a comprehensive and a multi-dimensional concept, because it says that for rural development you require overall development, and overall development should lead to better quality of life. And these require improvements in a lot of spheres, not just your economic improvement, but your social improvement as well as environmental improvement. So that is why it is also in a way related to sustainable development. While defining rural development, it can also be conceptualized as a process, phenomenon, strategy, and discipline. When we are looking at it as a process, of course, a process for attaining better quality of life, as a phenomenon where it is again, bringing in better output for rural settlements. It's a strategy because it involves certain approaches to be followed to reach a state of development. And of course, it is multidisciplinary because we can't just look at one way of developing rural areas. We require development of the society, we require development of the economy, development of the infrastructure, environment, everything. So it's multidisciplinary as well. In words of Robert Chambers, as given in 1983, rural development thus is a strategy to enable a specific group of people, poor rural women and men, to gain for themselves and their children more of what they want and need. It involves helping the poorest amongst those who seek a livelihood in rural areas to demand and control more of the benefits of the rural development. The group includes small-scale farmers, tenants, and the landless. So when we are talking of rural development, it involves giving importance to the marginalized more as compared to the other sections of the population. So people who are poor, women, men, and there are certain, small-scale farmers, marginal farmers. There are landless people in the villages. There are certain castes and communities which should be given priority when we are talking of rural development. And based on this, definition of rural development, Robert Chambers also came up with a, tool to find out the problems in rural areas and address it through better planning outcomes. So he called it participatory rural appraisal, or PRA, where he focused on involvement of these marginalized stakeholders in a much more bigger way so that they can become part of the development process and they can contribute to the development process in a more positive manner, because they would tell as to what they want or what they desire or what are their aspirations for development of rural areas, right? So thus, rural development, if we look at all the concepts and all the definitions, it is a process leading to sustainable improvement in quality of life in rural people, especially the poor. And this is what we'll discuss later about smart cities or smart settlements and smart villages. And we'll see how, rural development, the definition of rural development also is linked to smart village development. In addition to economic growth, as I said, it also involves change in popular attitudes and even in customs and beliefs. Now, there are certain basic elements of rural development. Because rural areas face certain problems in a more enhanced way as compared to urban areas, the basic elements of rural development should definitely include addressing the issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So, poverty, as we know, in rural areas is more as compared to urban areas. Unemployment as well as disguised unemployment is also more in rural areas. What we mean by disguised unemployment is that, more workers are actually employed in the agriculture sector than it actually requires. So if on a piece of land, 5 people can contribute the same amount of output, instead of 5 workers working on a piece of land, there are actually 8 or 10 people working on that agricultural field. So they are not contributing any extra output, but just because they do not have the skills or they do not have the education to get employed anywhere else, they are working on that agriculture itself, and thus they are not contributing to the GDP of the economy of the rural areas, and thus it is a kind of a disguised unemployment that is very rampant in rural areas. Also inequality, as I said, and what Robert Chambers already has given as part of definition of rural development, that we need to focus more on the marginalized sections of population in rural areas. That is because of the fact that inequality again is quite high in rural areas. So when we are talking of basic elements of rural development, we need to focus on poverty, unemployment and inequality. Rural development, of course, it is a universally cherished goal of all nations all over the world, and some of the objectives that are usually considered as desirable for development to take place include things like increase in real per capita income, which contributes to economic growth, improvement in distribution of income, which leads to equity, because in rural areas also there is inequality in incomes in the hands of people. So the marginalized, the poor, the certain castes and communities, they actually are not earning as much as certain other sections of population. So improvement in distribution of income again becomes important when we are talking of rural development. Then political and economic freedom. Again, economic freedom by way of attaining certain capabilities and given opportunity to work in different fields of the economy is also something that we should promote in rural areas. If we look at development of villages and the economic structure of villages, it was seen in the past that traditionally their occupational structure in rural areas or in villages was based on the caste system. So the caste had a very close relationship with the occupation that the people carried. So that curtailed this goal of economic freedom in rural areas to a certain extent, which may not be the case in urban settlements or urban areas. So economic freedom, again, political and economic freedom becomes very relevant in rural areas. Then for rural development and also for progressing towards a smart village. Then equitable access to resources, education, healthcare, employment opportunities and justice. Unless and until all the sections of population in villages are not given equal opportunity to access education and healthcare facilities, they will not be able to break through this vicious circle of poverty that we see in rural areas at times, where most of the marginalized population are actually trapped in that kind of a vicious circle of poverty. So equitable access to resources, education, health, employment, justice, all this is required. And then security of life and justice and protection against natural calamities and man-made disasters. In times to come, and currently also we are experiencing climate change, the frequency and the intensity of disasters has increased over a period of time, and we can experience it in our daily lives with the change in climate, change in the rainfall pattern and so on. So with time, protection against natural calamities and man-made disasters becomes even more important when we are looking at rural development and when we are looking at developing villages as smart villages. So this again with the climate change scenario and with the environmental disasters that are happening becomes very important if we have to achieve rural development. So, for achieving rural development or for moving towards this concept of smart village development, what strategies can be utilized or can be made use of? So, the strategies for rural development are based upon certain rural development approaches, and some of the strategies which have been used by the government at different points of time after the country achieved its independence are as follows. So, the government has been doing a lot in rural development since independence, because rural areas were one of the most underdeveloped areas at the time of independence, and the government has been trying its best and focusing a lot on developing the rural areas and the villages. So, there were certain strategies or certain approaches that the government used. First one was multi-purpose strategy, where it tried to incorporate certain social and economic factors for development. So, community development program, which was initiated in the 1950s, was one of the such strategy that the government tried to bring in through community development program. So, multi-purpose strategy includes involving social as well as economic development. So, under the community development program, the government tried to give in the hands of the people more assets, so that these assets can be used by them for generation of income over a longer period of time. And it was a very comprehensive approach whereby the poor and marginalized was focused as far as creating these economic assets was concerned. So, social as well as economic development was both targeted through this community development program, using the strategy of multi-purpose approach. Then a growth oriented strategy. So, the government observed that the rural areas, because they are largely dependent on agriculture and the primary sector, and because the rural areas were lagging as far as income generation and contribution to GDP is concerned, the government tried to induce growth oriented strategy, which would increase the pace of development of rural areas, and this development could later on trickle down to the surrounding areas also. So it was a growth oriented strategy that was focused upon by the government over 1960s and 70s and 80s. So as part of the growth oriented strategy, the government started the Green Revolution, which was mainly targeted to start with certain states like Punjab, Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, and certain southern states. The three crops which were focused upon in the Green Revolution were wheat, maize, and rice. And it was seen that those areas which had sufficient irrigation or a source of irrigation, good source of irrigation, and had access to high yielding variety of seeds could perform better. And it actually led to development of the states of Punjab, Haryana, parts of Western Uttar Pradesh, as well as Andhra and certain parts of Tamil Nadu, where rice is grown in large quantities. And because irrigation was made available to these areas, they were also given access to high yielding variety of seeds and other inputs like fertilizer use, mechanization, all that was introduced in these areas, and the farmers were made more aware of the benefits of these inputs. That led to a very fast pace of development in some of these states. But there were certain problems also. The social development part actually suffered, and it was seen that the inequality kind of increased in these states, though the per capita incomes also increased. Then on similar lines of Green Revolution, there were certain technology missions, there was Operation Flood, which was with respect to milk revolution, and technology missions were based on increasing the production of, say, pulses, oil seeds, and so on and so forth. So growth oriented strategy basically focused on some of focused on increasing the production and productivity in rural areas, because these rural areas are largely based upon the primary sector. Then target group strategy, where the focus, because growth oriented strategy actually did not focus on certain marginalized sections of population and it led to increasing disparity, the government also brought in the target group strategy at a later stage, overlapping with the growth oriented strategy. Now the target group strategy actually tried to focus on the marginalized sections and the have-nots, right? So the social development part actually got focus as part of the target group strategy. Some of the programs which were initiated for under this strategy was the PDS, or the public distribution system, the Antodaya scheme, etc. Area development strategy was also taken up by the government. In the 1970s, it was initiated. Some of the programs which took place as part of the area development strategy was of the nature of drought prone area program, hill area development program, etc. So these areas which are drought prone or hill areas or desert area program was also initiated. These areas require a different kind of approach for development, because their climate and their environment is completely different. So area development strategy actually focused on some of these ecologically fragile as well as climatology, they are different as far as the climate is concerned. So area development strategy had these kind of programs, drought prone area program or hill area development program, or even desert area program and so on, desert development program. Then the spatial planning strategy was also initiated by the government. There was a lot of discussion on spatial planning strategy and decentralized planning strategy, wherein regional, rural, urban, these areas can be focused upon, and there could also be multi-level planning through focus on certain spatial units. So, here technology plays a very important role. Then integrated or holistic strategy such as the Watershed Development Program or MGNREGA, which is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, wherein the focus is on various things. So, for example, in Watershed Development Program, the focus is on not just developing the economy of that area, because rural areas require more water. So, making certain inputs to agriculture and allied activities, facilitating it through watershed development programs was carried out. But it was also something which took care of the social development as well. So, these kind of integrated or holistic strategy focuses on not just economy but also society and also environment. So it is also in a way a sustainable strategy wherein you are focusing on improving the environment, improving the economy of people, and also targeting certain marginalized sections and benefiting them. Same is the case with Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which gave 100 days employment to rural people, and every person in rural area can access 100 days of employment. And because there is a lean period in rural areas, this actually became a very good tool of providing income and benefiting the rural poor as well as the women. A lot of women from the rural poor households have come out and participated and are contributing in the as part of the MGNREGA. They are benefiting from it. And lastly, participatory strategy, which is based on the concept of decentralization and bottom-up approach, where you go down to the grassroots level and the villages and the urban areas, the local bodies in the urban and rural areas can actually, come out and bring out the problems at the local level by incorporating the needs and aspirations of the people, because they are the closest to the people. So a bottom-up approach is what a participatory strategy focuses on. Then if we look at why rural development, as per census 2011, almost 69% of India's population resides in rural areas. Almost 72% of its workforce resides in rural areas. And the Indian economy's character is still rural, and rural areas suffer from lack of basic infrastructure such as water, sanitation, electricity, education and health. And as I said, rural poverty is higher than in urban areas. So all these factors require that we look at rural development and we transform our villages to make them smarter and more developed. Also, the need for self-sufficient villages which are self-sufficient as Mahatma Gandhi envisaged, is also something that needs to be brought about, and that can be done only by bringing about rural development. The structure of rural economy is basically based on two: agriculture, the farm sector, which varies from 40% in certain areas which are closer to large urban centers to as high as 80%, and the non-farm or the non-agriculture sector. Size of the rural economy is based on all these factors. We can assess the size of any rural area or a village based on the size of the population, the livestock population, the land resource or the land under cultivation which is there, because agriculture is one of the primary sectors of occupation in rural areas, and the dependence on land resources is very high. Water resource, forest resource, some of the villages are also close to forest areas, tribal villages which are dependent on forest resources. Quantum of production, so the production that the agriculture production that is happening, and inputs that are being used and outputs produced. So size of the rural economy can be assessed based on one or multiple of these factors. Some of the major problems of the agriculture sector are as follows. There is high vulnerability to natural calamities and high risk and uncertainty. There is preponderance of small uneconomic land and livestock holding. The land sizes are going on reducing with generation due to fragmentation of land. Then there is low capital labor ratio. Use of mechanization, tractors, threshers and all that is very low, and the labor use is very high in rural areas. There is low factor productivity. As I said, there is disguised unemployment which is related to low factor productivity. So one person, every worker is contributing very less if we compare it to urban areas. Long gestation and low rate of return. Agriculture products are actually low value products. So that is why the rate of return is low in the agriculture sector. High incidence of poverty, inequality, indebtedness. I've already talked about it. Preponderance of illiterate and unskilled workforce, which is one of the major factors of poverty and unemployment in rural areas. Because they do not have the required literacy and skills, they cannot get job in other sectors of the economy, and they have to largely depend on the agriculture sector. Because they are poor, they can't afford good education, health, and they remain unskilled and illiterate. So we need to break this cycle of poverty and and provide better opportunities to the rural people. Lack of remunerative prices of farm produce, post-harvest infrastructure is very low in rural areas, and lack of basic infrastructure and modern amenities. Briefly, because we are now talking of smart cities and smart regions, within which we are focusing on smart cities and smart villages, just a look at what a region is. A lot of people get confused between region and a city. Region is a much bigger area. It includes within it multiple cities and villages. So a region is a larger area. But if we go into definition of region, it is difficult because it is a fluid concept and every region has a unique characteristics and the scale can vary. A region can be as big as a country or a group of countries, or it can be as small as a district or a block or a state of say India. So a region is an area within which combination of environmental and demographic factors have created a homogeneity of economic and social structure. So there is some kind of homogeneity within a region, right? So that is something that needs to be told. There are two types of regions. Briefly, I'll talk of them. One is formal region and functional region. A formal region is a specific area that is defined by economics, physical properties, culture or government, and there should be homogeneity or uniformity with respect to all these factors. For example, the Indo-Gangetic belt or the Deccan Plateau. There is certain geography and climate which is similar. Himalayan belt. There is certain geography and climate which is similar that makes it a formal region, right? Or states, for example, linguistic definition of state was followed when India got its independence, and all our states have language as one common link. It may be, different dialects are there, but overall Maharashtra is defined by a certain language, Bihar is defined by a certain language, Tamil Nadu is defined by a certain language. So there is certain uniformity or homogeneity of language which defines it as a formal region. Whereas if we talk of a functional region is made up of specific, area, specific location and area surrounding it, and the area contains a kind of, link between one settlement and its surrounding areas. So, for example, metropolitan region. So, Delhi and its surrounding areas, Delhi being a very big city, and surrounding areas like Noida, Ghaziabad, Gurgaon, Faridabad. These are all part of its functional region because they are all linked by certain functions. People travel every day from these surrounding areas to Delhi, and certain people also travel in the opposite direction to access jobs, education, health and various other facilities. So, functional region is defined by close functional linkage between the mother city or the core city and its surrounding areas. So, and some of the major characteristics of the region are as follows. So, every region is distinct geographical area, it is unique, homogeneous, it can be heterogeneous in case of a functional region, it is dynamic, the character might change. For example, in a functional region, there is certain hierarchy. So, if you have villages, you have cities and towns, you have district, there can be hierarchy of regions that you can think of. And within each hierarchy of region, as I said, there can be a district, a state, a country, a group of countries. So, you can have multiple settlements in a region. So, you will have you can have multiple villages, multiple cities and towns in a region. Then there is a dynamic scale. Region can be different in scale according to shape, size. Problematic because every region will have a different set of problems that for planning one needs to understand. And for understanding that problem, one needs to have a bottom-up approach where we go down to the grassroots level, and that is where we are looking at when we talk of smart cities and smart villages. So, one needs to go down at that level, look at what are the issues at the very grassroots level and address them to develop those villages and cities to make them more smarter, to develop them better, to bring about smart villages and smart cities. And briefly, the rural non-farm economy. Rural non-farm economy is also very important. We've talked of the farm economy. The rural non-farm economy has a very strong correlation with respect to development in rural areas. And a World Bank study shows that there is positive correlation between increase in access to rural services and resources and the ability of the poor to benefit from rural non-farm economy. The rural non-farm activities include various things other than the agriculture and the livestock, such as value chain activities, agro-processing, transport, distribution, marketing, retail, as well as other economic activities in the rural space, such as tourism, manufacturing, construction, mining, and other self-employment activities like handicrafts, etc., etc. Thank you.